Okay, good evening. So the halacha tonight, as promised, is on Krias HaTorah, sitting or standing, and it has a bearing in Mitzvah Hashem on Shavuos, because we learn Yaser Sadibros, and the minhag is to stand, which is not straightforward. So we'll discuss that towards the end. But basically, when it comes to Krias HaTorah, the views about sitting or standing, there are three main opinions. One opinion is that there is no preference. You can do what you want. The second opinion is that it's preferable to stand. And the third opinion is that it's actually preferable to sit. So whatever you do, you have got what to rely on. So let's take a look. The starting point is the Machab. The Shulchan Aruch says in Siman Kuf Mem Vav Sif Daled, Ein tzarich la'amud mu'umad be'es shekarim b'Torah. You do not need to stand for Krias HaTorah. So the Machaba is very clear. The Mishnah Berurah says on that, Va'afilu ha'imdim al habima, even those who are on the bima, de'ein tzarich la'amud b'nei Sefer Torah ele k'sha'odam noisa. If the Sefer Torah is stationary, you don't need to be standing. Avol k'shemunachas b'mkoima, ein tzarich, you don't need to actually stand. So if it's on the bima, you don't actually need to stand. If it's resting on the bima, or he carries on and says, after they do Hagba, and someone's sitting down on a chair near the bima, even if you're very close to the Sefer Torah, the person is sitting, you don't actually need to stand. The only people who need to stand, if you see the brackets in the second line, the dafka haKoreh v'ha'oile l'Torah tzrichin lamud. Dafka the balkora and the person who gets the aliyah. But otherwise, anyone within, even if they're close by, if the Sefer Torah is stationary or is being held, you don't need to stand. V'da, the be'esha nosa, but when it is being carried, then chayev lamud lefoneha, you've got to stand. It happened in school the other day. We were in the middle of Shachris. We were up in the middle of Shema. And all of a sudden, there's lots of minyanim going on, and they needed a Sefer Torah. And they came into our main Beis HaMedrash. They took a Sefer Torah out. So when it's being transported, everyone's got to stand. How long do you have to stand for? Until it's no longer visible. It's out of sight. Or until the person takes it to its place, and it's going to be stationary. Okay, so that is the first opinion.
If women can't see it through the mechitza, we don't need to stand?
If it's presumably there, it's in a different rishus. So if it's in the Ezras Noshim, the Ezras Anoshim, in the men's section, then L'chor is a different section. So for example, if it's on the bima, then that could also be a different rishus. So it depends on the construction of the shul, where it would be. But again, I'm picturing, for example, the Dayan shul, which I think you're referring to. You stand, yeah, but you're in a separate rishus there. That's almost like a separate room. But anyway, I think the mechubad thing to do, if the Sefer Torah is being carried, then to stand. But technically speaking, if it's a different rishus, then it could be different. Or perhaps if it's visible, then to stand. Anyway, so that's the first opinion. That the Ein Tzarech Lam, you don't need to stand. Then you have the second opinion, which is the Ramah. The Ramah says afterwards, V'yesh machmirin v'oimdin, v'chein osa maharam. And there are those who are machmir and stand, and that was the practice of the maharam. Now, the Mishnah Berurah on that, if you look at the next box, if you're listening online, please email me at j.golker@gmail.com. I'll send you the handout. V'yesh machmirin v'oimdin. Look at the second line. Degam hamaram moida. Even the maharam admits, and he would stand, the medina shari, that midin you don't actually need to. And the tisvirle, the royal hader v'lamud. It's good to be machmir and to stand. Because a person should have in mind, when he listens to the laning, he's reenacting Har Sinai. It's as if he's at Har Sinai and he should stand. Or by Har Sinai, everyone was standing. And therefore that's the minhag to stand. Now, they say in the name of the Arizal that it's preferable to sit. There are many authorities for this. The Chesed La'alofim, I've got on the box there, number 3. Ein la'amod al shum kriya lo ases dibros v'ladegil midas shev va'al taisa, he says. Sit and don't stand. Right? It's a borrowed phrase, it's a halachic term, shev va'al taisa, but he uses it in a clever way, but you should sit and not stand. Okay. Va'al tasa, don't be proactive to stand. Okay, so you've got 3 opinions. no preference, preferable to stand, preferable to sit. Now, but there are other situations where are clearer. Between aliyahs, that you can certainly sit. Even those who are makbid to stand, during aliyahs you can sit. Says the Mishnah Berurah there in Simon, in this Kuf Mem Vav Sifkat Nechav, or ben gavr legavr lekula al mashar leishev, then it's perfectly permitted to sit. Interestingly, and this is perhaps less known, and that is during the brachas. The brachas for the aliyahs, the Mishnah Berurah says, "B'shas amiras baruch hu v'anias baruch Hashem hamavarech le'olam v'ed lekula al matzrichin la'amod u'davar shebekdusha." The actual, when a person gets in the aliyah and says baruch hu, then Mishnah Berurah says you should stand, and we'll see more about this in a second. If you turn over the page, the Ramah Pano, a very early source from the late 16th century, early 17th century, he says something very interesting. He was asked a question. You say, take a look at the second side. In Mechuyovim Lamed B'Shas Krias HaTorah, he concludes you don't need to stand during Krias HaTorah. Where does the practice come from? So he comes up with a very interesting idea. If you look at the second paragraph, halfway through, Uvadoros Horishonim, Shehoyim HaPeseach BaTorah Levado Mevarech Lefoneho, V'Hachose Mevarech Lachoreho. In the good old days, you didn't have, when someone got on aliyah, they would get up there and they would actually lane. That's one of the reasons why you do Shnai Mikri, prepare the Pasha, in case you got an aliyah. Getting an aliyah means you lane. Nowadays, the Golker does it. Nowadays, you just say the brachas. But in the olden days, originally, only the first person to be called up said the opening bracha, and the seventh aliyah would say the closing bracha. And therefore, you just have to stand at the baruch at the beginning because there was only one bracha. Lefichach afke kra b'lashon amida sheyesh b'mash amida mamish etc. Avol achshav shehar b'ha'ilim kulam omrim baruch hu k'damrin in time b'gemara b'pnei hanichnosim hayotzim ledivra hakol tov v'yof elamed kol zman hakriya dilman mishteli v'yosef gam b'shas baruch hu. He says originally, when only one aliyah stood at the beginning, said a bracha at the beginning, and one stood at the end, so then you would stand up at the beginning once, that was it, and you stood up once at the end, and that was it. But now there are 7 aliyahs, and there's a baruch at the beginning, and there's a response to that 7 times. He says it's not a bad idea to stand in case you come to forget, and you'll be sitting during baruch. That's perhaps a reason to stand. But l'maisa, you don't need to stand. But it's just interesting to highlight that point. So, la halacha. Most poskim agree, if you can see the bullet points at the end, that a person who finds it hard to stand and concentrate should sit. It doesn't have to be from and stand, he should better concentrate and be seated. There is no reason to stand between the aliyahs. One should stand for Baruch Hu and the response, but there's no obligation during the recital of Birchas HaTorah themselves, the actual brachas themselves. And although there are different practices, the practices in most congregations is that everyone stands for the Aseres HaDibros and for the Shira. Now, there's an interesting tshuva of Rav Moshe, the bottom box. This is in Erchaim Chelik Dalet Simon Chof Beis. It's interesting to see who writes the question. Amidas ha'am b'Krias HaTorah Aseres HaDibros Malas Kavodi B'ni Chavivi Harav Agan Harav David Feinstein. So he's writing to his son. His son asked the question. And he writes to his beloved son, Reb David, who was nifta not that long ago. Hine, bedova amidas ha'am b'shas aseres hadibros. Regarding standing for the aseres hadibros, shenohagu mefakvakim. Sheyesh mefakvakim. There are those who question that practice because it says in brachos Yud Beis Amud Aleph, D'Amar Yudam Shmuel, af begvulin bikshu likros aseres hadibros b'kriyas Shema. There was a time where they wanted to enact that you say Aseres HaDibros on a more regular basis during Kriyas Shema, Kamei b'Mikdash, Ela shekvar bitlu mipnei tarumus haminim, but they cancelled it because of the minim, those heretics. Upirish Rashi, what does that mean? Shelo yomru la'amaratzim ein shar Torah emes. They wouldn't say that Chas v'Shalom, the main part of Torah, the key part of Torah is the Aseres HaDibros, and the rest is not true. V'teidu she'ein karin ela masha amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And therefore, I'll prove it to you, these people will say, the minim will say, that the Aseres HaDibros is the main thing, because that's what HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself said, V'shomim mipiv b'Sinai, and we heard the Aseres HaDibros from Hashem on Har Sinai, and therefore, if we were to stand during the Aseres HaDibros and sit the rest of the time, you're giving food, ammunition to the heretics, to the minim, to say that the Aseres HaDibros is what God gave us, but Chas Shalom, the rest is nothing, it's not true, it's not important. V'lochein, Be'uvda zu, says Ramosha, shenagu lamu be'ez Krias zu, mipnei shezeh zochu kol Yisrael ba'atzma lishma mipnei HaKadosh Baruch hu ba'atzmai, shezeh adov ha'yosegod l'chashivas Yisrael. The reason why we stand is HaKadosh Baruch Hu, true, He gave us the Aseres HaDibros, and therefore it has chashivas. The b'shvil zeh hiltzruchu l'chol ha'kavonos, the Torah, you've got to have your proper intention, you stand, etc. She'udov ha'muvin l'kol odom, af she'ef she'ulai lochush l'Torah mos haminim. Yes, the heretics might say whatever they say. However, b'svar ba'alma, ein lahak b't b'shvil zeh, you don't have to worry about them. Lochein nira de'ein l'shalas min ha'minhag. You shouldn't divert from the minhag, and the minhag is to stand during the Aseres HaDibros. Aval adarabba l'dina osa l'shalas min minhag. On the contrary, you shouldn't just change the minhag. Hatzibur kedilel u'keduchsavti. Like I said previously, and therefore one should stand for the Aseres HaDibros. Do not change the minhag. Avicha ehavcha b'leiv v'nefesh. Your father who loves you with your heart, with all my heart and soul, Moshe Feinstein. Right, a beautiful sign off from his father. So to summarize, whatever you do for Krias HaTorah, you're okay. There are three views. One is no preference. One, it's preferable to stand. One, it's preferable to sit. Bein gavra legavra, absolutely fine to sit. But for the brachas, one should at least rise a little bit when they actually say baruch Hu in the response. But the actual brachas are not necessary. And the minhag seems to be to stand for the Aseres HaDibros and the Shiur.